International rights group OXFAM says poor people around the world are facing higher tax burdens, and this means that public services are underfunded, leading to a growing wealth gap between the rich and poor, fueling anger among the global poor. The charity, whose headquarters are in Nairobi, says in a report that a new billionaire is created every 2 days, but the poorest half of the world's population saw their wealth decline by 11%. The report has been released as political and business leaders, including President Cyril Ramaphosa, prepare for the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland on Tuesday. OXFAM says governments are increasingly underfunding public services and failing to clamp down on tax dodging. Earlier we spoke to Jabulile Buthelezi, who is the Media and Communications Manager at OXFAM South Africa. We began by asking her how bad the poverty lines were in South Africa.
The picture doesn't really look positive. And I think this is probably testament to, some of the reports that OXFAM itself has published over the past 3 years, with particular interest on the one in the previous year, where it actually gave even insights and more sort of highlights on various countries, specifically like your Switzerland and your Mauritius of the likes, that essentially where all these monies are flowing to. And, for example, you look at the report that also former President Thabo Mbeki shared just a few months ago, that had a bit of a touch on the illicit financial flows that sort of leave the country. If you look at the picture, there's more investment or more money leaving African countries than it is coming in.
I mean, the report also talks about black African women being the worst affected or the worst victims of the current status quo in South Africa. Just how bad is the situation?
It's really bad. I mean, if you look at the Pan-African scale, it's more like a sort of, there's a Pan-African trend, but if you draw down to South Africa and you look at the historical legacy of sort of what we stand for as the country, you'll realize that if anything is to happen in a household, the girl child will be the first to be told to not go to school and leave school and take care of either a sick mom, sick parent, or, so it's always, the focus is always on the girl child, on the female child, to be the one to step down. This actually affects them being able to advance, even though, situations are dire. And over and above some of the situations that girl children face, you look at just the care work economy. When we think of our domestic workers and our executive assistants, and as how we'd like to call them, and the amount of hours that they put into the kind of work that they do, which is why we literally refer to it as the care work economy, because it's a huge economy. And it continues to be undermined and exploited in various ways. And if you look at the people who do this kind of work, it's actually females. So unfortunately, yes, there is an overall sort of very depressing picture of what's going on. But as always, the woman person, the girl child, will always be at the very receiving end of always being sort of hit the hardest.
I know that today's report was actually spine-chilling and earth-shattering, but I would like you to take us back to last year, if you can, to the publishing of the Reducing Inequality Index, which measured social spending with workers and tax rights, showing that which some of the countries are best at closing the gap between rich and poor. What are some of these countries as per your findings, and can they be used as a benchmark for other countries to follow suit?
So, I mean, I'd just like to sort of point out Rwanda as an example. For example, I mean, they're not doing extremely well, but Rwanda is really a progressive country when, number one, you look at what they're doing with the women in all various sort of aspects of life and socio-economic levels in society, and also what they're doing with the girl child. And you look at, for example, in contrast, countries like Venezuela, that has done terribly in many aspects, trying to nationalize and not really working out. And you look at countries that continue to thrive. But if you try to unpack the nature of how they thrive and what exactly is it that sort of spearheads this kind of success of them thriving, you will find that unfortunately Africa is paying the price for these kind of countries to sort of, almost like Africa is sustaining the rich or the super rich of these elite countries, your Swiss and the Americans, and with their power behind, most of the things that they do to sort of keep some of the very vulnerable countries always at the mercy of the aid. And if you kind of pull together the trend, you cannot help but recognize and consider the fact that when some of the countries kind of become sort of bold and begin to maybe speak out and, you know, stand their ground, the number of aid that flows to them begins to increase, over and above the fact that they probably take a stand, but just generally the number of aid that has been coming to South Africa in particular, or Africa, it's decreasing. And you should ask yourself, why is it that there's so much money leaving Africa, but there's so much little sort of investment and money coming in? And it's perhaps one of the things that I think OXFAM is perhaps trying to sort of channel ahead of the Davos meeting taking place at WEF tomorrow, to say, you know, as world and global leaders and political heads gather to really deliberate about some of the socio-economic elements that affect a lot of countries globally, they really need to get to a point where rhetoric really does change from a kind of rhetoric that is purely sustaining the status quo, and has to somehow shift to leaders and political sort of masses really pushing a narrative that is collective, that is going to start fighting corruption and really start fighting inequality in a sense of policies and legislations that really start talking to the vulnerable. Because public health care, for example, you know, should be free. There's many other things that, for example, water and electricity and many other basic services are so over sort of taxed and priced that even the most vulnerable people are not able to access it. And these are some of the things we need to look into, just starting with the basics. And perhaps when we begin this political rhetoric, at least we're able to really offer basic services to the people who need it most.
You know, Jabu, does humanity need to, you know, to sort of revisit policies that can bring about a balance and address the challenges of inequality once and for all?
It really has to, because if we don't get to a point as people, as countries, where we join hands and push one narrative that is going to really shake politicians, and I really am hitting hard on them, because I think we always have the tendency or attitude to rather focus on the high-level people who continuously speak on this high-level rhetoric and really forget people who are accountable to society at municipal level. Public service should really have a turnaround that is able to really service its people. It really is a mess. This is why there's so much, you know, sort of corruption happening just from grassroots all the way up to, you know, a high level. And it's very important that we are able to galvanize the kind of voice and the kind of narrative that really does push for governments and politicians to really rethink the way they do things and policies. Because if we don't do this, we really do stand a risk of facing the kind of Africa that will depreciate, or, you know, the kind of South Africa that will depreciate. You look at issues like state capture and what is happening right now with the number of commissions that are taking place, and you look at what's going on there. And if these are just signs of us almost poking and trying to awaken the kind of work that really needs to be done in trying to change our societal value as people. And I think this will need a collective voice that will really challenge politicians who are accountable to the people to really try winning in terms of providing people the basic of services that they deserve, quality services.
You just said that government and politicians need to start rethinking about the way that they think. And would I be correct then to say that the governments, or rather governments, need to scale down on the rhetoric and then deliver on the specifics of implementation of their goals, of their agenda? I mean, they're all fighting against inequality, they're all fighting against poverty, but then the tax rates for the rich and bigger conglomerates and corporations have been cut. Your views on this?
So I think the government continues to undermine the work that is being done in terms of fighting poverty by continuing to be easy and working together with the super rich and corporates and helping them safeguard their wealth and helping them use their wealth and their influence to persuade and continue to influence policies. And I think it starts there. So a lot of things can change, and I think even with what has been done, not taken away with the progress being made, but our report also really has a very big ask, which is pretty simple. Over and above the efforts that are being made, we really are calling on the government to really be as clear as possible when it comes to how it does things with the corporates, because there's so much more that either the corporates should be giving back. And if you look at some of the partnerships that the government is in with the corporate sector, you know, it's a very it's a very complex arrangement that the government itself does not even benefit from. They're actually losing money with some of the contracts and contractual obligations that they are a part of with corporates. So they are just really fueling the ground and sort of just massaging the ground and just making sure that there's fertile ground for the super rich to continue to really live comfortably and, while the poor continue to get more poorer. I think it's the government's job to be able to tackle that ground and do that groundwork of, we're not saying start torturing the super rich, but we are saying don't just give them high preference in everything and forget the vulnerable who also deserve a fair chance to life, to health, to dignity. Human dignity, after all, is one of the values and elements that is enshrined in the...
You know, Jabu, what you're saying is not new. It's been the status quo for years now. And what can be done to sort of counter such a status quo? I mean, the tax are the highest tax. I mean, the poor are the highest tax, and the rich, they're treated with kids' gloves.
So we need to see, I think one of the things that we highlight in the report is to calling for the government to tax the super rich fairly. And I know there's been a lot of rhetoric where people are saying, it's not a fair argument because it's been cut already and that they make their own money and they're being charged fairly. But we still believe we've got reasonable amount of argument to make in that regard, that we can still look into it and do more. They are being undertaxed. And I think the moment we look into that, we'll be able to have some gap of some sort to be able to shift this money towards education, towards social development and social welfare. And until we make that bold shift, we will not be able to kind of have this money that the government always says it's not available and it's not there when it is. All they need is a few measures that are radical to be able to shift things around. And I feel that we really need to challenge them because it really is going to take them being bold enough to perhaps even accept losing a few friends and really making sure that they balance things. The gap is so wide that it cannot be human. It is so wrong. We're not saying everybody must be equal. People work for their money and you need to work for whatever you have. But the government is accountable to making sure that basic services are available to people and that they've got decent healthcare.
We don't have much time, unfortunately, but then I'm not going to let you go until I asked you about Davos. Some of the world, the global leaders have now gathered in Switzerland for the Davos, for the World Economic Forum. So is it, would I be correct to say that the World Economic Forum is that platform that shapes global economic policy, and does it have the necessary gravitas to do that, and insofar as addressing such issues as inequality?
It really does. Davos is the most powerful platform to change the game and to change the narrative. However, what is the problem is what happens when all these political leaders get back into their countries and get back into this cocoon of stagnancy and just really not caring and just forgetting what they need to be doing. I also think that Davos is pretty important because when we start opening it up as well to not just the leaders but also some of the grassroots activists who are able to assist leaders with a bit of radical thinking to help them come up with some of the most freshest ideas in terms of how can they really shift things around in order to change the economies in various countries based on whatever needs are. It has to not be enclosed. And I think that the rhetoric really needs to shift from the talk at high level at Davos to really make a difference to grassroots activists, and it has to cascade down to people on the ground. It has to.